So hi, my name is Sarah, and my capstone topic is the need for alternative sentencing for mentally ill offenders. I will be discussing four main topics today. The first will be a discussion of the surge of the U.S. prison population in the last 100 years. The second will be recidivism rates and the revolving door of the prison system. The third will be current controversial prison practices involving mentally ill inmates. And the fourth is a suggestion for a better future. Currently, the United States has the highest rates of incarceration worldwide and holds 22% of the world's prisoners. This begs the question, in a first world society that is proclaimed to be more civilized than the world around it, why is the U.S. supplying a fifth of the world's criminals? According to the World Health Organization, as of 2014, the United States is the third most oppressed country in the world, displaying some of the highest rates for mental disorders such as anxiety, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. According to a 2014 national survey conducted by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, approximately 9.3 million adults suffer from a form of mental illness. This makes up 1 in every 5 people, or 20% of the total national population. The earlier state era of addressing mental illness was characterized by the implementation of large state mental hospitals. In contrast, the current era is characterized by the criminalization of the mentally ill. The 20th century was characterized by a desire for the understanding of mental illness and how it links to criminal or deviant behavior. Researchers like Sigmund Freud expressed the possibilities of reversing certain behaviors by analyzing and understanding rather than punishing. While state mental institutions were secure units, they lacked the punitive features of the current prison system. These facilities included a trained nursing staff that would provide constant supervision as well as overall care for the residents. In addition, each facility would have an in-house psychiatrist who was able to assess mentally ill individuals in a natural environment and for an extended period of time. This uninterrupted and prolonged observational period allowed for doctors to form meaningful and personal relationships with the residents, which in turn helped doctors to make correct diagnoses and suggestions for medication and treatment. The current attitude of the prison system is characterized by the criminalization of mental illness. Jails and prisons focus on punitive measures for inmates, and taking care of inmates' well-being and mental health falls short on the list of priorities. And as you can see in these pictures, like how they're housed in these little cages with, no range of movement. And then this picture on the bottom is actually how they restrain people who they find to be, difficult to control. They actually put a net, like a mesh net over their head, or like a stocking, so they can't see anything. So very restrictive, very focused on punitive measures. In order to correct the existing issues of the U.S. prison system, it is important to discuss some of the contributing factors of the current epidemic. Implementation of the 3-strike law ensures a life sentence for anyone with 3 prior convictions. The 3-strike law was created in a bill signed by President Clinton in 1994. The law states that anyone convicted of a serious violent crime who has had 2 or more prior convictions, including drug crimes, was given a life sentence. Because of the lack of rehabilitative services available in today's prison and the current prison environment that exacerbates pre-existing mental illness, mentally ill individuals are likely to reoffend and acquire these strikes. The term recidivism refers to an individual's tendency to reoffend and to return to prison. According to a 2012 study conducted by the National Association for Mental Illness, 54% of the mentally ill prison population will become recidivists or reoffend. Due to the constant influx of previous reoffenders re-entering prisons, the U.S. prison system has become known as a revolving door. Ultimately, this revolving door is a major contributing factor to the current prison epidemic. Dr. Joseph Bloom's The Incarceration Revolution discusses the correlation between America's decreasing mental health and rising prison population. In the book, Bloom discusses that one of the major reasons behind America's current prison epidemic is the federal government's refusal to regulate treatment of the mentally ill population of each state. This refusal is largely based on a statement written by President Franklin Pierce in 1854. A portion of the statement reads, "If Congress has power to make provision for the indigent and sane, the whole field of public beneficence is thrown open to the care and culture of the federal government. To do so, in my judgment, would be contrary to the letter and spirit of the Constitution." In The Incarceration Revolution, Bloom also discusses how the federal government's refusal to intervene also served financial motives, as it exonerated the federal government from the cost of treating and finding a suitable punishment for mentally ill offenders nationwide, as well as it spared them from the ethical issues that are bound to arise when dealing with mental illness within the public forum. I had other pictures there, but it said there would be like formatting problems, so I guess they're not there. Deinstitutionalization is the name given to the policy of moving severely mentally ill people out of large state institutions. Mentally ill residents were generally moved from these large facilities into unknown, unstable, and unsure circumstances. Deinstitutionalization began in 1955 with the widespread introduction of chlorpromazine, which was sold as the first effective antipsychotic medication. It also promised to rid America completely of mental illness. The process of deinstitutionalization showed little consideration for the well-being of the mentally ill. Individuals were discharged from hospitals without ensuring that they received the medication and rehabilitation services necessary for them to live successfully in the community. As a result of deinstitutionalization, many of America's mentally ill were forced onto the streets, which is a living situation that perpetuates criminal behavior. Ultimately, deinstitutionalization led to an overwhelming increase in the U.S. prison population. And as you can see on this chart right here, how it's just this steep incline from the year 1950 with 500,000 inpatients in mental hospitals to 1955 when chlorpromazine was introduced. The downfall was almost immediate. Since the era of deinstitutionalization, national prisons have become virtual dumping grounds for America's mentally ill. This is due to the fact that, in today's legal system, mentally ill defendants are largely treated with the same severity as offenders who are considered mentally healthy. This is also due to the fact that the acceptance of mental illness as a mitigating factor during trial and sentencing is based largely on the discretion of the jury and the judge. In a 2005 study using a mock jury, researchers demonstrated that juries will accept the existence of mental illness as a mitigating factor in 3 out of 10 capital cases. For the other 70% of capital cases with a mentally ill defendant, the jury will make a life sentence or death penalty recommendation. So on this slide, the first chart is a slide from a 2004 New York Times study, and it shows that an average of 50% of state and federal prisoners are classified as mentally ill. And then this chart on the right is actually really interesting. You can see how the homeless population and the prison population increased exponentially from 1963 to 2003, while the mental hospital population is almost non-existent in 2003. So they're saying that is a contributing factor. Now that I have discussed why a large majority of prison inmates are mentally ill, it is important to discuss how these inmates are treated during periods of incarceration. U.S. prison officials have increasingly embraced a variant of solitary confinement to punish and control difficult inmates. This type of solitary confinement is referred to by jail officials as segregation. In segregation, prisoners can spend up to 23 to 24 hours a day in small cells with solid steel doors. They live with extensive surveillance and security controls, the absence of ordinary social interaction, and little, if any, educational, vocational, or other purposeful activities. According to Henry J. Stedman, who is a scholar in the field of mental health and criminal justice, the last 10 years have seen an almost 100% increase in the use of isolation or segregation units as punitive measures in state and federal prisons. In addition, the overwhelming majority of segregation inmates display symptoms of serious mental illness. Because of pre-existing mental conditions, inmates are often impaired in their ability to handle the stresses of incarceration and to conform to a highly regimented routine. Hence, they may exhibit bizarre, annoying, or dangerous behavior and have higher rates of disciplinary infractions than other prisoners. Prison officials generally respond to them as they do to other prisoners who break the rules. Once in segregation, continued misconduct, which is often connected to mental illness, can keep the inmates there indefinitely. The stress, the lack of meaningful social contact, and unstructured days can exacerbate symptoms of illness and provoke reoccurrence of these symptoms. In many cases, segregated inmates will begin to self-harm for attention or for stress relief. Mental health services in segregation units are typically limited to psychotropic medication and mental health rounds, which consist of a psychiatrist briefly stopping at the cell door to ask how the prisoner is doing. This can happen once a week, twice a week. There's no really set amount of time that they have to spend with the inmates. According to one federal judge, putting mentally ill prisoners in isolated confinement is the mental equivalent of putting an asthmatic in a place with little air. A 2015 survey conducted by the Washington Post estimated that 43% of ill defendant. The first picture is that of Alvin Ford, who was sentenced to death in the state of Florida in 1986. Ford, who was 20 years old at the time, was accused and convicted of killing a police officer during a botched home robbery. While sitting on death row, Ford displayed bizarre behaviors that appeared to worsen over time. His psychiatrist and jail officers reported incidents of him proclaiming himself as Pope John Paul II, as well as spreading feces over the walls and door of his cell. Citing this behavior, Ford's lawyers argued that, under the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, Ford could not be legally executed. His lawyers cited that due to his mental illness, his execution would be considered cruel and unusual punishment. The controversial aspect of this case lies not in the verdict, but in the official judge's opinion, composed by late Justice Thurgood Marshall. A portion of the opinion read, "The issue is not whether Ford could be executed, but when his execution could take place." He then continued to write, "My point is only that if Ford is cured of his disease, the state is free to execute him." Ultimately, Ford remained on death row until 1991, where he died in prison of natural causes. The next picture depicts Andre Thomas, who is a current death row inmate facing the implications of the Marshall opinion. After being incarcerated and sentenced to death for murdering his wife, Thomas began displaying erratic behaviors while on death row. In one particular fit, he gouged out both of his eyes and ultimately ate one. Thomas's state-appointed psychiatrist diagnosed him with schizophrenia and deemed him unfit for execution. However, due to the opinion in the Ford case, Thomas remains on death row and will undergo the process of greenlighting under a court-appointed psychiatrist until he is deemed competent for execution. The practice of greenlighting is based on Judge Thurgood Marshall's written opinion in the case of Alvin Ford. Greenlighting involves recruiting the help of a court-ordered psychiatrist to treat death row inmates until they reach a baseline of competence. Achieving this baseline of competence restores the necessary retributive effect of capital punishment. This baseline of competence is demonstrated by the defendant's understanding of two components. The first is the severity of the crime committed, and the second is how that ties into their imminent legally supervised death. The ultimate goal of the process of greenlighting is to negate the presence of mental illness so that a legal and ethical execution may take place. In many cases, mentally ill individuals sit on death row for several years until they are deemed fit for execution. This period of extended time can exacerbate pre-existing conditions as well as unnecessarily draw out the torture of death row, which many medical and legal professionals classify as a cruel and unusual punishment, which is a violation of the Eighth Amendment. One of the most controversial components of the greenlighting process is forced medication. In prison and on death row, the forcible medication of mentally ill inmates is only acceptable when the individual meets tests for dangerousness and is considered a danger to themselves or to others. However, prison officials often use this argument loosely, and in most cases, if a mentally ill inmate refuses medication, they will ultimately be forced to take it. According to Dr. Thomas Guthelli, MD, the most common antipsychotic drug currently used in U.S. prisons is olanzapine. Olanzapine is an injectable drug that is used to treat symptoms of bipolar and schizophrenic disorder. While it is FDA approved, the drug is so powerful that the inmate must be closely supervised for 1 to 3 hours after the injection. This is due to the long list of side effects, such as severe drowsiness, coma, confusion, uncontrolled muscle movements, high blood pressure, and seizures. In the most severe cases, injection of olanzapine can result in death. This practice of forced medication brings up the argument of a term called synthetic sanity. Synthetic sanity is defined as a condition of pseudo-sanity that can be palmed off as competency. The main issue of synthetic sanity lies in the fact that, without the ingestion of medication, the sanity would not exist. Many argue that executing individuals under these conditions still constitutes as cruel and unusual punishment because the individual is still inherently mentally ill. However, forcible medication is still common among death row inmates, and synthetic sanity remains an acceptable form of competence to greenlight execution. The act of restoring a prisoner to a stable state of mental health purely for the purpose of execution creates questions of ethics, informed consent, and civil rights. These questions of ethics are especially apparent in the experience of court-appointed psychiatrists, whom without their expertise, the process of greenlighting could not exist. The highly personal experience of the psychiatrist in the practice of greenlighting is largely neglected. Amongst court-ordered psychiatrists, there exist two schools of thought. The first is known as the pro-involvement position. This position holds that court-ordered mental health assessments should be provided by mental health professionals who are well-trained, experienced, highly skilled, and willing to conduct a thorough evaluation while maintaining a sharp awareness of the need for legally and ethically relevant protections for the individual being assessed. The second school of thought is known as the anti-involvement position. These individuals believe that involvement by clinicians in such assessments place them too close to the administration of punishment and threatens to compromise the public's perception of their primary treating role. Some people also argue that being involved in greenlighting is a violation of the APA Code of Ethics, which all psychiatrists are bound to follow. Principle B notes fidelity and responsibility to the role of the psychiatrist. The anti-involvement position argues that psychiatrists are not being loyal to their position as a caretaker when working in conjunction with the legal system. Now that I have discussed the current treatment of mentally ill offenders in U.S. prisons and on death row, and the ethical questions that arise, it is important to explain why there is a need for alternative sentencing for the mentally ill. Alternative sentencing of the mentally ill is based on the legal concept of diminished capacity. The doctrine of diminished capacity was set out in Section 2 of the Homicide Act of 1957. According to the Homicide Act, diminished capacity has 3 criterion. The first is that there must be an abnormality of mental functioning. The second is that this abnormality of the mind must have been caused by a recognized medical condition. The third is that the abnormality of the mind must substantially impair the defendant's mental responsibility. The presence of a severe mental illness fulfills all 3 criterion. Diminished capacity denotes diminished responsibility for a crime. Therefore, individuals who fulfill the criterion for diminished capacity should be considered less responsible for committing a crime. This lessened sense of personal responsibility warrants a sentence that is alternative to the norm, especially in cases of mental illness, where under the right conditions, rehabilitation is not only possible but probable. According to Dr. Joel Dvoskin, an expert of psychiatry at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, when effective treatment and resource services are used, the majority of people with mental illness present no greater risk to the community than other people, even those who have previously exhibited criminal behavior. Prison diversion refers to the practice of alternative sentencing for convicted offenders. The ultimate goal of these facilities is rehabilitation rather than punishment. In a 2002 Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration survey, a survey used 6 prison diversion programs from across the nation to assess the efficacy of these programs on the day-to-day mental state of the inmates, their motivation to succeed in these programs, and the prevalence of recidivism, or reoffending and returning to jail. Conducted over a 3-year period, which tracked both current and recently released mentally ill inmates, the survey ultimately found that 1. Prison diversion works in terms of reducing time spent in prison, as evidenced by lowered recidivism rates. 2. Prison diversion does not increase public safety risk. 3. Prison diversion programs links inmates to community-based services, which can offer them employment opportunities post-release. And 4. In general, prison diversion results in lower criminal justice costs based on the rehabilitative nature of these programs. As an alternative prison sentence for mentally ill offenders, specifically those who commit violent crimes, Dr. Dvoskin recommends the nationwide implementation of a system of uniform, secure forensic state psychiatric hospitals. These hospitals will consist of one central facility surrounded by smaller units designed in the style of college dorm rooms. The central facility will be surrounded by secure pods or dormitories, each built to house approximately 24 inmates at one time. The pods will be equipped with 24-hour video surveillance, as well as a team of staff and an in-house psychiatrist to address the issues and needs of the residents. The central facility, or heart of this facility, contains services and classroom settings designed to provide learning services to the residents. These services can range from skill-building classes such as computer programming or data entry to courses in confidence building and self-efficacy. The acquisition of vocational skills will be especially valuable to the residents, providing them with the qualifications and possible connections to begin a career upon release. Ultimately, this remote and secure environment will foster the acquisition of social, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral skills that will help the residents of these facilities to safely return to their communities. This semester, I have learned a valuable fact regarding the current prison epidemic. It is not the presence of mental illness that perpetuates criminal behavior, but our treatment of mentally ill inmates within the system that contributes to high recidivism rates and the revolving doors theory of our prison system. If mental health issues were correctly diagnosed and treated during periods of incarceration, many mentally ill individuals could gain the skills and confidence to become productive members of society. However, there remain concerns about prison diversion programs for violent, mentally ill inmates. Some people argue that what's more important, it is failing the mentally ill population of society. For that reason, it is vital that we continue to make strides in understanding mental illness and continue testing new ways to rehabilitate mentally ill offenders. The end.
That last point kind of intrigues me. I can understand sort of alternative sentencing for someone who's not violent.
Right.
But you've got the added problem that someone who's murdered someone, despite the fact they're not responsible, are still a threat to society.
Right. I think that part of the argument is that in the right environment that they wouldn't be that way.
In the right environment before they commit the crime, or?
Both.
Okay. But now that they've committed the crime, Did you find any research about whether people like that, people who committed violent crimes, can be rehabilitated?
Not that I can think of right now.
So that's a complicated issue, obviously.
Right.
I don't know the answer.
Right, that's why I said there needs to be a lot more research done on that.
Yes, that was. You mentioned the Homicide Act of 1957. I remember that from your written thing. That was a UK law, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And was that sort of adopted as...
Derived as common law.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Adriana Santiana, and I'm going to be examining the relationship between law enforcement and psyche in the work productivity. So I have a kind of a personal investment in this. I come from a family of law enforcement officers, and then when I transferred to MCU, I was given the opportunity to take psychology and criminal justice. And I chose these emphases because I felt that just knowing the criminal justice system wasn't going to help me become a better officer, which is my ultimate goal, is to become a police officer. And I felt that just knowing the ins and outs of the criminal justice system was great, but having a psychological background would help me understand crime and also people in general. Having the opportunity to study it simultaneously helped me apply what I was learning in psychology to the criminal justice field. Similar to criminology, how knowing criminology can help you understand the crime and the criminals that are committing crimes. I felt that although it's fascinating coming from a family of police officers and a future in wanting to be one, I decided to study the psychology of police officers. When examining this field, I realized there's not that much information about it, and I narrowed my topic to focus on the way that an officer feels, thinks, and copes, or rather their psyche, how it affects their job and the way and how well they do their job. So I did a small study using LAPD Harbor Division officers. It's pretty close to us. This study was made to focus on all police officers. However, obviously only using LAPD Harbor Division has some generalizability issues, meaning I can't generalize all officers based off of one department division. Some variables that affect generalizability issues are department policies. So sheriffs are going to have different department policies than LAPD, and that's going to make there be a difference between their answers. And so I felt like if there was a larger scale study, I would be able to get a more generalizable answer. So my research question was how the psyche of an officer is going to impact their work productivity. So an officer with a poor or negative work productivity, work psyche will have a low work productivity rate, and an officer with a positive or good psyche will have a higher productivity rate. My methods were using literature that was already focused. There was a lot of literature relating to these subjects, but none on this subject exactly. So what I did was used a bunch of resources about it and made my own conclusions, also using my survey. And I evaluated all the possible variables, such as media's impact on society and how that might affect each department. And then, again, different departments are going to have different rules and laws and stuff. I did a 15-question survey with 61 participants in the Harbor Division, LAPD, and I think that was a lot for with what everything is going on in society. Officers are very hesitant to share their opinions and do surveys, so I think it was kind of a big deal for me to be able to get 60 officers involved in such a study. The limitations was that it is a really new field. Criminology is a huge field, it's becoming really popular, but psychology of police officers and people examining that is a really, really new thing.
So I had a lot of limitations with finding good information on this subject per se. My access limitations were that I wasn't able to go beyond Harbor Division. I felt that if I was able to go beyond Harbor Division and get a fuller scale using all LAPD or even other departments, sheriffs, that would give us a better idea of what the true result of a study might be. Again, many officers are really hesitant to share things because they're afraid of either civilians' responses to things or even criminal justice administrators' responses. There are a lot of variables like whether or not they're married, their gender, how many years on the job that they have. So that was part of my part of the study, that I wanted to make sure that I got a full round scale of people that are married, single, male, female, different times on the job. And I felt that in my study I had a lot of varied time on the job results. This study is important because with the results, criminal justice administrators can look at this, and similar to how criminology students or studies can help prevent crime, I feel like this study or studies similar to it can help better the lives of officers, therefore producing better and more well-rounded officers. And that, I think, would help with the community in general. With less tension on the streets, I feel like the crime rate could drop and there'd be more of a happy feeling about police officers rather than a tense feeling. The mental health of officers is not talked about a lot. I feel like there's a lot of depression and suicide. There's a really high suicide rate in police officers because of what they see and the culture of police officers. They tend not to share things. So they hold everything in, and I think that culture begins to create depression in a lot of officers. And because of that depression leads to suicide in a lot of cases. Me being a future officer, it helps me to understand what type of job that I'm getting onto. And I think other officers or people that want to be officers may look at this and think maybe this isn't the right job for them. They not, it might help deter officers or people that don't necessarily want that job, and it may help bring people into the job if they think that they're fit for it. I also think this study can help civilians' view on police officers because I feel that media only shows certain aspects of the job, and by promoting this study or studies similar to it, it can help civilians understand that there's so many layers to this job, and it might create a little bit more of peace between civilians and officers. In my survey, one of the questions was, how do you feel society on average perceives you as an officer? These are 3 of the results that I felt captured the general message. So there's 3. So this is the first one. The average citizen feels as though an officer's job, it was a link, so a lot of the officers did it on their phones. There's a few typos. The average citizen feels as though an officer's job is clear, cut, and simple. The citizens always make statements that they would have done something differently if they were in the same, not listening to directions from an officer. Citizens think that officers want to get in a shooting. This could not be further from the truth. Citizens think that officers get away with shootings we are involved in. The department and community come down the hardest on officers after shooting, and this puts huge stress on officers' professional and personal life. It seems as though our judicial system should spend more time on keeping suspects in jail in the first place. These criminals get away with all sorts of crimes, and the district attorney chooses not to file on. We need to keep criminals in jail and understand that police officers are humans and are trying to make the community safe and a safe place to live. But as long as criminals are being released without doing any jail time, they will continue to go through our broken system. So obviously this is the opinion of one officer. This does not necessarily reflect all officers, but having been around in my own experiences, there's a large frustration with officers trying so hard to get criminals off the street, and with the overturn rate, currently it's very frustrating for a lot of officers to be trying to be proactive and get criminals off the street and then have them be back on the street the next day. It's frustrating. This person had 11 years on the job. How do you feel society on average perceives you as an officer? I think most people appreciate the work we do, but are not vocal about it. The loud, vocal people are mostly haters. This person had 5 years on the job. This officer obviously has 27 years on the job. From a personal point of view, I feel that the communities I have served over the past 27 years do appreciate what I've done. I also believe that there are some officers within the organization who hold themselves to a higher degree than those in the communities which they serve. Over time, this has created division amongst the two. Officers must realize that every contact with the community should be considered and viewed by them as community policing. One bad contact affects the organization as a whole. Respect for people should always be at the forefront of what we do. I see it no different than going to your favorite department store and you as a consumer looking forward to spending your earned money on an item that you like, and in doing so, you receive poor customer service from a representative of the store. It pisses you off and turns your disposition for the worst. However, when greeted by an energetic and knowledgeable sales rep, you tend to feel good about every aspect of the contact and sale. Police work is no different. Treat people the way you would expect a loved one to be treated. I felt this response was a really well put response and reflects the other half. So you see the two different sides of the spectrum with these responses. During my review of literature, as I said before, it was really difficult to find any literature that directly talked about this topic. So I had to study a lot of things that were around it, such as work productivity, police psychology, police stressors, and media impact on the police, and formulate my survey based off of the literature that I read. There was no findings that necessarily supported or rejected my research hypothesis, because there wasn't really anything directly on the topic. And with the small sample of officers, there's a weak relationship between the two. So there wasn't necessarily an opportunity for me to reject the study so I feel like if there was a bigger study, I would be able to correlate a bigger relationship. So thank you.
I have a question about your last point, which I'm sort of struggling with a little bit. In what way do you think your findings did not support? I mean, I'm not quite sure. How would you show a non-relationship between a person's attitude and
In the survey, and I didn't really put this, but in the survey there was a couple questions on, for example, one of the questions was, when you work and you don't feel appreciated, do you work less? So there's a lot of questions about that in the survey, and I was expecting, based off of my research, I was expecting more answers of like, yeah, I work a little bit less when I don't feel appreciated, but a lot of the answers were disagreeing with that, and so that kind of surprised me, and I think in that it disproved what my theory was that if you're not feeling appreciated, then you're not going to work as hard, and that was kind of what I've experienced throughout my life, kind of not just with my family, but being around police officers, I've kind of experienced that, so that was kind of what I assumed, but the survey, and again, the survey isn't generalizable because it's only Harbor Division. But in the survey, I was expecting more answers that would support my theory of the fact that it was, if my partner is not doing their job, I don't want to do my job as well as, but I didn't get those types of answers. I got more answers like, no, I'm going to do my job regardless of who appreciates me, whether or not society appreciates me. So that's what I meant by finding it.
And it would be interesting if there could be some sort of objective standard, if you could somehow measure.
Yeah. And I think that was my point, was if I was able to do this on a larger scale and get, maybe all of LAPD or at least a lot of cops from throughout California, I think that would be able to help make it more relative to other officers throughout the country. But it's so difficult to do that because there's so many variables, and even the Sheriff's Department and LAPD, their answers are going to be totally different.
That was another question. How did you get 60 officers? I mean, that's...
Well, my mom's a police officer at Harbor Division, and using SurveyMonkey, it's a really easy, you just send a link, and so a lot of officers are able to pull it up on their phone, and I've been interning there, so I was able to make a couple connections and just kind of send it out to as many people as possible. I think it was sent to 85 officers.
Okay, that's a great response rate.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was very impressed by that. I think it was only over the course of like 4 days. So I was really excited about that.
You've got a future as a survey.
Well, hopefully as a police officer, maybe I could do surveys on the
Well,
side.
true. I mean, if you became an administrator, you could apply some of this
Right.
Sort of research capability to
It was really, really interesting getting to study this aspect of it because I've always only studied the crime aspect of it
Right.
before. So being able to study the officers themselves is really interesting for me.
Okay, well, thank you. Very
Thank you.
interesting.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes.
I want to thank you guys for being here. My name is Nadia Ramirez, and today I will be talking about foster care. For this project, I thought it would be important to bring awareness to foster care. I believe that a lot of children are being neglected and are not given equal opportunity as children that are not in foster care. I did this research, and during the research, I concluded one thing, that a lot of kids that age out of foster care tend to have poor outcomes, and these poor outcomes include poverty, teenage pregnancy, and even death at some point. Doing the research, I wanted to get a more in-depth look as into why this is happening, so I did interview 2 people for this research. One of the persons that I interviewed did not feel comfortable with me using their name, so I will be referring to them as John Doe. The other person said she was fine, her name is Akwane, and I will be referring to them during the slideshow. So I want to start off just to state what is foster care. So foster care is the raising or supervision of foster children as orphans, delinquents in an institution, group home, or private home, usually arranged through the government social service agency that provides compensation for these expenses. A report done in 2010 by the AFCAR, which stands for Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Report System, stated that there is approximately 74.2 million children in the U.S. Of these 74.2 million children, 402,000 are in foster care. Of those 402,000, only 101 are being adopted each year. One of the main obstacles that I found in the research was education. When a child is young and placed in foster care, they tend to move around a lot, so it's hard for them to focus. When a study done by Washington State stated that children that were in elementary school tended to score 16 to 20% lower on standardized testing than children that were not in foster care. When it comes to high school rates, only 30% of the children that are in foster care tend to graduate. Those who do go to college, only 2.5% end up graduating. Learning about these stats made me wonder what's going on inside the system that is causing all this. I did ask the 2 people that I interviewed about their educational experience while they were in foster care. John Doe stated that the first couple years that he was in foster care, he was placed there when he was 8 years old. During the elementary stage, he was fine. He said that the home that he was at was very supportive and encouraged him to get good grades. But after that, when he was moved, he felt that he was just part of the system, that their foster care parents just were having him because they wanted a check. He went to 4 to 5 different high schools, and this caused him to fail a lot of classes. He did, however, have the dreams of going to college, which he did, but after 2 semesters, unfortunately, he did drop out. When it came to the second person I interviewed, Akwane, she was placed in foster care when she was 10 years old. She had a very similar experience. She said that sometimes the schools, even though they want to help, they can't because they move around so much. And at the age of 16, unfortunately, she had to drop out because she had a teenage pregnancy. When a foster youth reaches the age of 18, it's time for them to go through the aging out process. So there's two major options when you age out. You can either become emancipated from foster care, which means you are completely become detached from foster care. There's no help being provided. Or you can join a program called AB 12. So there's pros and cons to both of these options, and I will go over that right now. So for emancipation, a lot of foster kids decide to go this route, and they feel the pros are becoming independent. They don't have to rely on anyone. They don't have a social worker anymore, and they can create their own sustainability. The cons for this is because of years of unfortunate abuse or neglect, they tend to develop social anxiety, educational problems, and lack of social skills. The AB 12 program, the pros that that come from this program is that they will give you financial aid to find a place to live at. So if you want to live in an apartment, as long as you have your roommate, they will fund that for you. They also offer financial aid for schooling. The cons to that is that you still have a social worker, and they come out every month, and you have to mandatorily be enrolled in school or have employment. Of the two people I interviewed, Aquani chose the emancipation route. She said that she was just done with foster care and that she felt that she could do it on her own. And she did have a prosperous outcome. She and her son moved in with her old relatives, and she got a job at a bank, and she says that she feels happy now, that once she left foster care behind. When it came to John Doe, he actually used the AB 12 program, and he said although it helped him a lot, in the end he felt that he was still part of the system and that he was just another number, and it made him feel very alone and depressed. And this actually led to him to have addiction problems and have behavioral problems. When an adult ages out of foster care, it is the research I did concluded that there are higher reports of arrest and delinquent behavior and incarceration. This can cost the government up to $3 million each year in convictions or incarcerations. They also rely heavily on public assistance, and this will cost the government an estimate of $8 billion each year. I believe that if the government were to invest more money in programs to try to fix this problem with younger children, it could really benefit them, and it would save them a lot of the money that is being used to try to help them once they already aged out. There are programs available besides AB 12, but they were really hard to find, and due to lack of funding, it's very hard for anyone to get in the program. One of the programs I found was called Opportunity Passport. This was created in 2009 by Jim Casey. This provides financial, educational, and vocational help for adults that are ready to age out of the system and don't want to go through AB 12. So what they do is they create an environment where they help the youth that's getting ready to transition to learn how to invest money, and they help them invest money so that when they're ready, they can actually purchase real estate. They help them with scholarships to go to school. The only requisites that you need for this is that you have to have lived in foster care from the age of 14 and up, and that it's only available in certain states. Again, unfortunately, this program is really good, but it's not available everywhere. I did mention this program to both of the people I interviewed, and they both said that they had never heard about this and that they wish they had. Another program I found was the WIA, which is the Workforce Investment Act. So this act helps children when they're in high school, well, young adults when they're in high school. So what it does is it gives them a part-time job, and it helps them gain skills that they will need to become part of society and blend in normally. Again, this is also an alternative to AB 12. Although these programs are very helpful, I believe it's not enough. The two main things that I think need to be tackled are the better schooling system for the younger children, create a system where it's not so common for them to move around every month or the other. I think this would really help them. And the second one is bettering the aging out process. The two options that they have, the main options, are either stay with them or go on their own. The people I interviewed said that they felt pushed to go through the AB 12 program but they didn't want that feeling of being part of the system. Like the other programs I talked about, these programs are a little bit more supportive, and they treat the person like they are not just part of a system or another number. Trying to fix foster care is not going to happen overnight, but I do believe that bringing awareness does help. And we are actually in Foster Care Awareness Month, and I didn't even know about this month if it wasn't for this research, which is, again, something that I think needs more awareness. In the end, it's going to help our young children to have a better future, and also we can help the people that are getting ready to age out. But I go back to the same thing. I really do think that foster care needs to change. Well, it needs to change for the children that are younger, so this way we can avoid the problems in the future. Thank you.
Did you get any sense why is there so much sort of moving around and so on at a younger age? Because if we're going to change that, we need to understand why it happens. Did you?
Yes. The reasons that I got was basically because a lot of the parents just either can't handle, they have more than one foster child, so they actually ask for the children to be moved around. Sometimes they just don't mesh well with the family that they already have. I know with the person I interviewed, John Doe, he said when he was younger, he lived in one home for 8 years. But after they adopted another kid that was a little bit older, they didn't get along, and for some reason the parents were more protective over the child they actually adopted. So they requested for him to be moved out of that home.
And that's almost what you'd expect, right? So
Yes.
if you adopted a child,
Yeah.
suddenly he's
Yeah.
yours.
Or if they already have their own children and they want to be a foster parent, it's very common that sometimes the child that is already there might feel jealous, or, it just won't get along with them. So the parents, again, will
Right.
have them relocated.
Right.
Mhm.
I almost wonder if anything can be done to change that.
I know, it's a very, after doing the research, it was very disheartening that not a lot is being done.
Right.
Yeah.
You'd have to think of an entirely new system.
System.
Are there still orphanages?
I think so. That's one of the, actually I have not looked into that, but I will definitely look into that.
Right.
Yeah. I think there should be stuff.
Well, there were orphanages, and at least they were stable, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like yeah.
So interesting. And so that was that's the really interesting
Yeah.
issue. Maybe you could include in your paper that this is where more research needs to be.
Yeah. And I would really want to, look into that to see if there's any way where people can get involved and help them out of that situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No crowds waiting.
No, I think this is my crowd, which I'm very happy to see everyone here. So, all right. All right. My name is Ryan Murray, and I'm very happy to be presenting my subject of meat and modernity, which I've been working on for more than a few months now with Dr. Larry Dunlop. He's been very patient with me. And without further ado, I will begin. So, this topic started about 2 years ago, just kind of playing around with the idea of why people should be vegan. I came across this because I had decided to become vegan once again in my life, and I wanted justification to do so. So I was going through Mike the Vegan's YouTube page, and what I found is that there is rationalization to do so, in the sense that if you decide to be a vegan, you can look at a video like this, and the person has an explanation as to why the human body actually wants a plant-based diet. And of course, the antithesis of this would be a normal diet that we eat today. And there are, of course, people in favor of that, saying that we need macronutrients and proteins from meat, not just a plant-based diet. So, going even further, there are two different camps when you look at the development of humans from Homo erectus to Neanderthal to Homo sapien. So, The YouTube user, Mike the Vegan, was suggesting that we not only are physiologically at this point developed to be herbivores, he's also saying that, well, not just him, but others are saying that our brains developed due to carbohydrates, chiefly from carbohydrates that were made due to domesticated agriculture. This other camp, such as the one that's promoted in this Times article just published about a year ago, suggests that humans developed as a result of the advent of meat within their diet. So one camp says meat and proteins allowed us to be humans. The other one says carbohydrates from a vegetable diet did so. So sit with that for a moment. And with that comes lots of implications. The first one that I considered was that in the model of carbohydrates advancing us as a species, you have somewhat of an egalitarian approach to gender roles. A woman could have, be harvesting and kind of garnish the gather effect to human evolution, if you will. On the other model, to some extent, a woman would be dependent on a male if she's pregnant. If your nutrients from protein is coming from meat, she would not be able to hunt. The man would have to go do so. And I'm not saying this is factual, but I'm just saying that I played with this idea. So then it led me to wonder, where's meat today? How do we view it? What are the associations that we have with gender roles, and what traits does meat have that we aren't aware of on the unconscious as consumers? So, for my capstone, in this past year, I've seen so much information, and this was part of my capstone, gathering information as to why meat and meat consumption and the development of meat or animals is actually detrimental not only to the environment but to our health. This is one of the biggest problems I actually had, not the biggest, but one of them for my actual capstone was finding information and articles that suggested that meat was actually good for human health in the sense of cardiovascular health and decreasing cancer. This was difficult to find. Regardless, I looked at meat and I thought, could it be that meat supersedes all, meat's masculine trait that we've given it, supersedes all other information, whether it be nutritional or an environmental impact. So someone could potentially know, it's public information, that it requires large parcels of land to grow bovine, whereas that land could actually be used for human consumption. This is regarded or disregarded for some reason, and I thought, could it be that because meat is given this masculine trait in our patriarchal society, it's held above all other? This is important because we know that gender bias exists in almost all races, cultures, political affiliation, and actually increases in a general trend throughout people's lives. And actually, it's women who, in these two studies, hold larger gender bias. So as a consumer, if you view a masculine trait and you have a gender bias to be superior to a feminine trait, you might be led to actually consume something or do something that is actually detrimental to your own health. We'll start from there. The reason that I found this subject to be important and the kind of nuance to it from a global level and not just a national or state is because of this image. This is the United States as it stood in 2015 in regards to deforestation. Since 1600, 90% of the United States has been deforested. At this point in time, all deforestation that's occurring in this moment, over half of it has to do with cattle grazing or animal agriculture. So that's either the grain, soy, or anything else that the bovine, pork, or sheep is consuming for our consumption. So once again, there is some sort of lack of correlation when it comes to the consumer not realizing that this is no longer efficient and something does need to change, and meat in the modern era needs to be reconsidered. This is my thesis. Personally, this was my importance. This is a picture of the Grand Tetons from the backside, the Idaho side. I had the pleasure of working in Wyoming for 2 summers and at a nonprofit. I went into the backcountry one day and I had this spiritual realization of, maybe you can call it transcendentalism or whatever, but that this is where I found spirituality. And here at Marymount, this is something that I found from a professor who's not here at the moment, but collectively, that consumerism doesn't necessarily change because of physical and tangible evidence. It usually occurs because of a spiritual occurrence or some sort of event. So for me, this was the importance of doing this project, to illuminate the fact that maybe we are consuming meat without realizing the ramifications, and its association to masculinity may be the reason why. So this is where I started at least having fun with the project, and a lot of it, my not having fun with the project was my undoing. But later on, Professor Dunlap let me know that it was okay to use images such as this, and this really was, I feel, the most powerful images that I could use later on. So the first one is from Campbell's, and this is a 1950s ad. This is from the later 2000s, a Canadian whiskey brand, Canadian Club. So again, we can see with this, with the your dad was not a metrosexual, we can assign sexual traits to food. We can assign it to anything. This isn't having to deal with feminine or masculine traits. This is going further. This is saying heterosexual, metrosexual, homosexual. So this is somewhere that I was able to grow in my research project and actually learn not to give my opinion necessarily, but dissect an image, which was important for the relationship between consumption and how the consumer viewed masculinity in meat. This one, of course, is just limiting women from consuming meat for men only. And it's kind of funny, it's kind of in an inviting way, but you'll like it too, ladies, if you were to try it, to be so daring. One of the problems I found, because I was not conducting a study necessarily, was just organization, to be quite honest. In the beginning, as you can see, I had many tabs open and everything was entitled Capstone, and so just to streamline this, what I ended up doing was just making many folders, simply enough. One of the larger issues, though, that I had with the project was relying on texts. At some point, I thought I had realized the holy grail of my project, which was utilizing the books I already have on the subject. So I spent about 7 or 8 hours pulling this information, trying to figure out how to cite it, asking multiple professors how to cite it, and then going to Professor Dunlap after doing so and realizing that's actually not how I was supposed to do it. In reality, I either needed to cite it differently in APA, but this also lost some of its credibility because it was not from a direct source. And so as a result, from using this, I would then have to go to other studies or change just the parenthetical or insight text citation to as cited in Oppenlander, the Comfortably Unaware book. The other issue I had, particularly with citing this book, The World Peace Diet, published by William Tuttle, or Will Tuttle, is that he comes to a conclusion, almost in every single page of his book, that meat is not good for consumption on a spiritual level, and that it could solve world hunger, world peace, and gender dynamics, and so on and so forth. Working on my paper and my presentation even, I wanted to come to that conclusion over and over again with everything that I stated. I did not want to be objective and stand back, and again, it was Professor Dunlap who had to deal with my stubborn habits and say this is not what it is, and it took quite far into the semester for me to realize what I was actually trying to achieve. So some of the questions, and this is also what I learned because prior to these questions I wouldn't have been able to answer them, was are humans inherently herbivores or do they require meat? This is really the basis of what I'm asking to an extent, because while the hypothesis and the nuance of this capstone is that meat should not exist in the modern era. We need to reconsider the way that we evaluate it and the symbology that we associate with it, because it's not advantageous for us to be consuming it on a personal level or a global level, micro or macro. So what I found is that there's actually been societies such as the Aztecs and the Mayans who would have a plant-based diet, and they would utilize fats and carbohydrates and other complete proteins from vegetables, and they'd be able to get the nutrients they needed. During festivals, occasionally they would digest meat. Where would humans receive micronutrients such as B12, complete proteins, and iron without consuming soy or other foods that have been shown to cause cancer and hormonal imbalance? There are new alternatives. We are all used to the soy alternatives, soybean, which is, tofu, which is just as detrimental to our body in the sense that we're having allergic reactions to it now because we're inundated with it, and because of the large parcels of land it requires to grow. But now we have wheat gluten, and now we have pea protein. So we have other alternatives. Again, this is modernity. This is something different. This is something novel. 3, could it be that meat simply tastes good and is merely convenient at this point in time? My point being from this working on this, yes, however, this is the issue, and this is the one that can be remedied by changing dietary habits and consumer consciousness. So, thank you very much.
As you probably know, I'm a skeptic about all this.
Of course, of course.
Do you really think we could change our thinking? Eating meat is so widespread, so universal.
Ask a rural community to stop fishing from the local lake and relying on that, or even the Eskimo and Inuit communities to stop relying on whale fat. But at the same time here in the United States, chiefly in places like Los Angeles and New York and Chicago, we do have these alternatives and we can make an impact, and these are usually the epicenters where change can be found. So I'm making it black and white, and I'm saying I'd love to be the flaming swordsman to, hopefully this is the vanguard of something. So, yes.
Considering that throughout the world it's billions and billions of dollars tied up in growing of cattle, sheep, industry, what would happen if it's not realistic to think that could all just end.
Right.
Or that all of these ranches and farms could be replaced by plant.
Right.
I have a hard time seeing how it could take hundreds of years for such a thing to change, don't you think?
Right.
What happens financially?
Of course, and I don't imagine this to be instant, and I think one industry that we can look at is coal and oil versus these renewable energies. So if you were to look at actually the jobs that are offered due to renewable energies, they're in plethora compared to the oil and coal industry, whereas these actually last longer. So we don't foresee the nuance in technology potentially that could exist from agriculture that's not only seasonal, but more than likely constant because of globalization. There would be workers needed constantly. And the majority actually of the meat industry has become, it's governed by robots. Usually it's someone like a manager or someone who's overseeing a barn or something to that extent. It's not as often that you see cattle herders who are raising artisanal organic meat. While that's increasing, at the same time, it's actually the farm worker industry that might offer more jobs. My point being that we're not sure of the demand, just as we weren't sure when the coal and oil industry were diminishing, of the jobs that would be created, such as renewable energy and solar.
Right, one thing that might accelerate things is climate change, because food's going to become very, very expensive, and specifically meat, because you have to feed cows or whatever, and it's all going to be incredibly expensive. These are the good old days in terms of consumption,
Right.
and this could all change so that veganism might be more necessary,
Right.
because it's going to be cheaper to eat vegetables than it is to eat anything else.
Right, and this is what at least William Tuttle offers, and I know you've been to Germany last summer, and something that you see especially there, not that they're an overly progressive society compared to the United States, I'm not saying that, but maybe in this arena they are, that there is a lot more, yes, there is a lot more veganism as a result of this. So not just the deforestation, but looking at this more broadly, we could tackle a lot of issues having to do with famine with veganism, because food could be used more accurately as opposed to the inefficient means that we do so with it now.
This argument has been made for several decades now that in the global development literature, where poor countries were experiencing famines where their own people aren't being fed, while the country is exporting meat or flowers or cocaine or whatever. The question does not boil down to scarcity and land use, but the ownership of the land, who's making the decisions. If your land is going to return more selling meat, then you will deforest and you will grow cattle, right?
Right.
And if you stop that and the demand in the United States decreases for beef, that doesn't mean these people are something more sorghum for their own people.
Right.
So there's a strong economic structure issue behind it. So
Right.
who makes the decisions, who wants to make controls the decisions?
Right. Yes, exactly. And quite often it's not the state or the government that owns it. In many cases you see other entities actually owning large parcels because of this in other states. So it could be Koreans owning parcels of land in Syria and an arid desert where they're trying to raise agriculture, and this actually plays into risk of potential ownership and agency of the actual country. So I completely agree, and I'm not sure the remedy of this now, but I think the progression being slow is the only thing that we could offer, is that this wouldn't be instant. So,
I don't think it's just a question of slowing down, I think it's a question of finding alternatives.
right.
So the work of our professor, Earl, is very relevant to this as well, because you tie into the energy question.
Mm-hmm.
If the same land can produce carbon rights that don't destroy the earth, but improve our habitat,
Right.
And provides economic incentives,
Right.
then that could be a very powerful alternative to capitalism.
Right, and Jadora does employ many in that local community, and they do indulge in the carbon market. So for anyone who is not aware of what Dr. Earl does, he takes part in Jadora, which is a company that buys up parcels of land to retain their ability to consume carbon. So just like we all know, part of the carbon cycle is that a tree will consume carbon dioxide. So now by protecting this and actually just having it preserved, you can get carbon credits due to the Kyoto Accords, which were in the early 2000s. And so with that, a company that produces too much carbon, they can actually give their credits as a result to a company such as Jadora to offset. So exactly, there are alternatives.
So it would be very interesting if the United States would consider the market in such a way that reforestation efforts in the middle of the country would help. But in the meantime, we still want to feed people, and that will become more of a challenge for us.
Another question about not just eating meat, but like which meats.
Mm-hmm.
Like I grew up Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
and so in our like a pork was something that we did not eat. It was,
Right.
And there was a reason why supposedly why we didn't eat it. I was a kid, so I did what I was told.
Yeah.
And then I have family members now who are Buddhists and they don't eat beef, and so it's one of those things that culturally some animals are seen as sacred or not. That
Right.
so that it influences not just the eating meat, but which meats they eat. So that I guess looking at that globally, looking at different areas that eat more of one another.
Right.
What the rationale is about why they don't eat this meat in particular.
Right.
And then is that does that offset them eating other meats, or do they eat less meat because they don't eat pork or beef or whatever it is? And also the idea about animals as pets,
Mm-hmm.
and so that makes some animals more sacred
Right.
than others as
Right.
far as a source of our own protein.
And it also suggests, and it shows really, that meat consumption is relative. It really does. It is affected by these large, persuasions or these factors, such as your religion or your view of what is domesticated or what is not, or maybe even gender. These are large things. When you look at World War II, our meat consumption increased. Spam masubi, spam itself, that's when people started to consume spam, whereas now if you were to look at it, people would say, oh my gosh, you're going to eat that canned meat. But back then this was extremely accepted, and it was extremely accepted to consume meat. So we know that wherever you look at it is just as relative as culture is itself. So we could say that not only is it affected by this gender and the relation that we have to it, but that it could be done. That this information could be one of those factors that play into why meat is consumed and not consumed. And as far as there being an alternative that is offered, I think because of the free market that we live in, it's just a matter of time before someone presents that, and it seems like they already have in the case of Jadora. So.
What if beef cattle become extinct?
Beef cattle become extinct? As just
What a
happens?
horrible thought. This is my counter argument.
Right. I mean, I guess then chicken consumption would increase, which is
The chickens would become
right. Yeah.
In
Yes.
the research, was there a clear delineation between vegan and meat? Because I know vegans who will eat no eggs, cheese, any animal byproduct,
Right.
as opposed to a byproduct that does not kill. For
Right.
honey is my vegan nephew won't eat honey because
Right.
it's from a live animal.
Right.
So where does that delineation there between,
Mm.
you say fish, or byproducts, fish, chicken, as
Right.
opposed to total vegan, which all of those byproducts are unacceptable.
Right. So the information that I was utilizing was mostly meets correlation with cardiovascular disease and cancer. So in that case, some of them were just distinguished as being explicitly plant-based, and then in other cases it was vegetarian, veganism, and then omnivorous diet or a meat-based diet. So it wouldn't be, and then there were other ones where in the UK it was a breakdown of how much carbon is produced for 1 pound of that food. So, and that's why even with this I was hesitant as much as I could to say the word vegan, because it's staunch and people are still hesitant with that word. They view it as too black or white, which there's two views, there's a liberal view of it and there's a radical view of it. So, yeah. Anyone else?
Very interesting.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank you, Ryan.
very, very much.
All right, so I'm going to be presenting today my capstone project on Go Find Spot. And Go Find Spot has to deal with parking. Now, when we think of the word parking, we just think of, where we're going to simply park our cars. Very, very simple. It can also be personal problems. We can't find parking, therefore we're late, and to maybe your job, and it affects your job performance. But when I was doing my research, I also discovered that parking is more than just being late or a personal problem, but it also affects the environment. How so? Well, first we have unnecessary traffic congestion. Now, not necessarily talking about freeway traffic congestion, but more or less street traffic congestion. This occurs because people are usually looking for street parking. They don't want to pay for parking to park in a parking lot, so they'd rather look for street parking. But also, as we are looking for parking, if there isn't a designated area for us that we have a desire to park, we are often releasing more carbon dioxide in the environment because we are wasting gas for unnecessary mileage. Also frustration, we can also get a little, sorry, oops. Okay. It can also be, frustrating, which is obvious. But also the safety. When we think about parking, for a lot of us that have grown up in, let's say San Pedro, it's not really an issue. However, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and it can definitely be a very big issue, especially regarding safety. For example, I worked in downtown LA, and right by the Staples Center, and parking, as a minimum wage job, I'm not going to pay $10 every time I go to work. So I would be that person that is going around looking for parking. Oftentimes when I get off of work, maybe around 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I am usually by myself walking, and I want to be able to create a platform where not only will this app help you find parking, but also, give you an idea of a safety rating on how safe it is to walk from your location to your car. Not only this, but as I mentioned before, parking can be a burden because of how much it costs. What can we use our money to spend? How can we use the money we spend on parking? When we think about meter parking, where's that money going? Is it really going back to the city? We can use the meter parking, or maybe even tickets that you get for parking, and that can be sent back to, improving the streets and potholes, and, making the roads a lot, better to be driven on. When I was conducting my research, the name that kept on popping up was Donald Shoup, and he is a professor at UCLA in the Department of Urban Planning. And what really got my attention with him was this quote, which basically says that the few academics have studied parking as a land use, perhaps because it is such a low status. Within local government, parking is probably the lowest on the status ladder. So he would consider himself a bottom feeder, and that there was a lot of food, even though there's a lot of food down there. Now, when I was doing my research, I had a very hard time getting anything about parking. I mean, I saw it as more of an issue as just, you know, not finding a place to park. I mean, I mentioned the environment and also how it can improve our economy. And Donald Shoup also, you know, makes it clear too that why is parking not as researched as it should be? So just an estimate regarding unwarranted travel time. So in 15 blocks in Westwood would mean its approximation of 950,000 miles per year of unwarranted travel time. This would then translate to 47,000 gallons of gas, which then will lead to 730 tons of carbon dioxide released up into the atmosphere, and that is not the best for our environment. Obviously, climate change is a very real thing, and so the way that we can combat parking in efficient ways, the app is to hopefully help reduce traffic, reduce street traffic, reduce pollution, and reduce energy consumption. Now, the concept behind Go Find Spot is a mobile app designed to locate empty parking spots with real-time updates, as well as reduce the amount of time and energy spent looking for parking. It is also designed to give specifics of where you are parking and determining the safety of the area you are choosing to park in. And also will also aim to reduce the amount of traffic within busy cities, as well as promote a healthier environment by decreasing vehicle emissions and finding parking for you. The functionality of Go Find Spot will establish a database that allows users to add their own information regarding the availability of parking spots. So basically, you would just open up the app, a map will show, you would select your destination, and you'll be able to start adding parking lots, street parking, parking spaces, etc. So this is just a little, I guess, demo of, or an idea of how the app would look. I got this from Google Maps, but basically it would just be a sleek interface, easy to use. Anybody can use it. I mean, we want basically anybody that can drive or knows how to drive to be using this app. And basically what it would do is you would enter the destination, you would click on your location where you want to park, and then a map of a parking lot would show up. If, you know, it's available, it would be green. If it's red, if it's unavailable, it would be blue. Blue. Red, and if it is reserved, then it will have a little art on that. Product features, safety rating. So as I mentioned before, I want to install a 5-star safety rating that will allow users to give their own idea of how safe it would be to walk from your location to your car. And this is, I mean, predominantly for, you know, younger women, as myself. It can be often very dangerous, and, you know, parking lots also by yourself are not the safest place. Also, it will show the distance from your desired location and where the parking lot is. It will show the price and the best available pricing, as well as be able to pin your location just in case if you forgot where you parked. You'll be able to pay in advance, therefore defeating or slowing down the process of, you know, getting to your destination. So instead of you getting out your wallet and paying and dealing with all that, you will already be able to just get into your spot. You also have the ability to get free parking, and by this I will touch on it in a couple of slides, but real quick, basically it would be part of a promotion package, and if you refer a friend or anybody, you will be inclined to get free parking as a way to promote the product. Going back to safety features. So obviously we advise against using the app or any apps or your phone while driving. But there will also be a voice recognition feature where you are able to talk to the app. It will recognize some keywords, and that will then send the information to the app, and that will be able to provide you the necessary information. So, for example, go to, and then you can say your location, and then the app will automatically, send that to the server and provide you with the necessary information. And a driving sensor. So before you use the app or any maps or location apps, navigation apps, you have to enable your location services. Now what this will do is it will alert the app, and if you are in motion, then the app will temporarily be disabled, and you will not be able to continue with the app unless you are at a standstill and it's not showing that you are in movement. Product development. So there's a 10-step validation procedure that I researched, and I thought that would be beneficial for the success of the app. Starts off with a construct definition, measure development, content validity, oh my god, assessment, measurement, model specification, pre-test of the scale, scale purification, assess scale validity, new sample data collection, cross-validation, and norm development. Now, this is a graph showing the amount of cars that have been registered in Los Angeles County from 2000 to 2015. Now, there are about, according to the census, there are about 10.1 million people living in Los Angeles County. Now, within that 10 million, as of 2015, about 7.5 million cars are registered. Now, given not everybody, people own multiple cars. Not every one of these cars is being driven on the road. But even if you subtract like half of that, that's still like that's still a lot of cars being out on the street. And also, an issue with parking can also be seen on college campuses. Now, here at Marymount, we're very fortunate. Our student population is about 1,000. Price for parking per semester is $45. That's not that bad. We've never had to really deal with parking but I remember a couple years ago there was an issue when parking passes were a lot more expensive, thus meaning that students would park on the street, and that would also obviously be an issue with residents. Cal State LA has 27,000, Northridge 37, Long Beach 37, USC 44, UCLA 44. Now, this per semester, for college students, they're not in the best financial shape ever. So, coughing this up just for parking, it seems like a little too much. So, if we have an app that will give them an idea of where to park, maybe let's say on the street, so they don't have to deal with this paying for parking. It will also reduce the amount of traffic congestion that would be around a college campus for those students just trying to look for parking. It's become a multi-million-dollar market, according to Forbes. There are about over 2 million apps in an app store, and just about 64% of Americans have smartphones. Now, this is a new generation. Millennials are basically using service apps to do everything for them. And I know it may sound lazy, but they're finding new ways to do things a lot easier than it would have been in the past. And instead of halting that, I feel like technology is moving at such a fast rate that we have to just keep going along with it. So a few examples of service apps that are very, very popular are Uber and Lyft, which is a car riding service. Postmates, which is an app that you can have any restaurant, fast food chain delivered to you. WAG is a dog walking service. Airbnb, you can rent your home, just put it up on an app and you are set to go to rent it out to anybody. Washio is an app that allows customers to set up their, get their laundry done, have somebody come and pick up and do their laundry. Ship is also, instead of going to the post office and dealing with all those lines, you have Ship, you have somebody come pick up your product and they do it for you. And then, Go Find Spa can be on this list as well, because I mean, basically it's an app that will give people the ability to choose their parking spaces and know exactly where they're going, as well as eliminating the need for looking for parking and causing traffic congestion and unnecessary. So the market trends. The reason why I have this up is just because I want to kind of give a visual of how much of an incline that the m-commerce is on its way to, and it can possibly go up. This is just an estimation from Business Insider. It goes up to 2020, $600 billion industry. And we have the PC commerce, which is just you buying things on your PC, but that's pretty much has been at a standstill and will pretty much be at a standstill. I mean, the internet is not going anywhere. If anything, it's advancing more, but the m-commerce is basically the new way of getting things done. Now, market strategies. Promotion via social media. This is how it's being done. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can buy a promotional tweet for, no less than $1 a tweet. Target people with a lot of followers. Promote the app. Have people with a lot of followers promote the app. And also, like I mentioned before, when you refer a friend, you will get $10 worth of free parking. This will be an incentive to get people, using the app and more people being involved in not only helping with the issue of parking, but also helping the environment. And also school campuses. I really believe that this can be, this could have a successful rate if we target school campuses. Now, there are parking apps already available. So we have Best Parking, Spot Hero, ParkWiz, Parking Panda, My Luck. I did a quick little survey at my job with 10 people, and just wanted to see if anybody. I personally never heard of any of these apps, but I just wanted to see if anybody has really heard of them. And about 3 people said they didn't. They've never heard of these apps. 3 people said that they have heard, and then remaining said that they didn't hear about it. So these apps are just specifically they just need to make their revenue, and which is understandable. But I also want to be more than that and also push the agenda of fighting traffic congestion as well as helping the environment. So closing remarks. In an innovative way to fight against parking, helping the environment and the community, also helping one another. The only way that this app can work is if we constantly use the app and we are constantly updating it and inputting our own information, like when we leave a parking space, or if we're going to be leaving a parking space, what's available. Providing a safety feature which will allow people or users to use the app and find out if it is even safe. If I would have had an app that would tell me if how safe the area is, then I would probably not park there, or I would just end up paying the $10. It's just sometimes not even worth the deal with feeling unsafe. And then also creating a movement. This can really be more than just a parking app, and it can be more as we can get involved in understanding climate change. And cars are not going anywhere. People like their cars, people like their independence. We can try our best to promote carpooling services. We can try our best to promote public transportation. But I know me personally, I will go out of my way to use my car. And even when I was here at Marymount, the shuttle service is great, but it's just me being on my own time. I'd rather drive. So instead of being we have to we have to be proactive instead of reactive. So instead of trying to pushing the agenda of getting people to drive less, we should try to work with that and make it more so that try to eliminating the problems at hand. So like I said, if you know where you're going to park, I mean, that will eliminate the need for traffic congestion. That will eliminate the need for circling around and wasting gas and, you know, burning more fuel that you don't really need and thus harming the environment. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh my god, that was so hard.
Okay, I've got all sorts of questions.
Okay.
Don't be scared.
Okay.
It just shows how interesting your concept is.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned, well, one question or a bunch of questions. Do you have any idea how much it would cost to develop a thing like this?
How much it would cost?
To develop it?
I do not. I was hoping that I mean, in my paper, I did mention getting investors involved. However, I mean, this can also be probably creating an app, I mean, it can't be that hard. I mean, if I get somebody that is willing to volunteer their time and their, you know, intelligence of creating an app, it might, but the thing is making it as intricate as I plan to, which would probably be the money process. I mean, I'm looking at maybe like roughly $1 million, multi-million deal.
So you're aware that it might be quite...
Oh, very, yes. And also, very. But I mean, I also feel like if people really if people really care about what's really happening to our environment, and I mean, even if people hear about like just a simple, like just some of the features, like the safety feature and just making, you know, users feel comfortable, I feel like that would give them more of an incentive to, you know, maybe start a GoFundMe page and, you know, have other people who believe in the idea will be able to help to contribute with the app.
And a related question, do you know those apps you listed at parking apps, do you know what they cost to participate in?
To create?
No.
Oh, to have. Okay, so let's see. The way that these apps make their money. Where is it at? Okay, so Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft.
Go down more to the next slide, which I think you had a list of actual parking apps.
Oh, here. Right here.
Okay.
Right here. So I downloaded Best Parking, ParkWiz, and My Luck. Now, all of these apps are free for download. However, I did my research, and the way that most of these apps do make their money is by charging a service fee. So basically, if you're gonna reserve a spot at a parking lot, they will also charge a little extra to get that parking space. Now, another way too that I can also see, I can see like making revenue as well. I'm sorry. And what I also noticed about, I think it was ParkWiz, was that they would have advertisements. So they would have let's say a parking lot, we'll say lot 8, I'm assuming would pay the app to get their parking lot to be top billing, no matter what the pricing is. But I mean, when I looked up a location, there was a parking lot and it said ad, but and it was right there in my face. So that's another way that we can that they generate revenue. I mean, parking. I mean, if you think about it, like parking usually goes for like about $10, $15, $20, sometimes even $30. When I was working in downtown LA, just going to my own job, I would kind of be subjected to paying like $30 if they're like the Lakers were playing, or, you know, so I mean that's another way to like get more people. It's just more money hungry people trying to just get parking or just see what they can get out of paying for parking.
Another question, how many of the features you want to have on your app do these apps have?
I mean, the only really main feature that these have are just the reserving, and I think one of them had a pinning location, but the reserving and just being able to like locate parking. Now, another thing that I noticed too was that with these apps, they're only in certain areas. So let's say when I put in my area, so right now I'm living in Hollywood. I put in my address, and the only like spots that were popping up were near Hollywood and Highland, and that's it. So just mainly like I mean, if you've been to the Grove or if you've been to like the Glendale Galleria, like you go into the parking lot and it tells you lot this has these many spaces open, you know what I mean? So it kind of like defeats the purpose, but I mean, this would be used for everywhere. And that would require a certain server that would allow users to input their own information. I know another app that does this is Waze. And the way Waze works is, you know, users go and can report things, like if they see a construction area, then they'll be able to go on the app and report, at exit 20 there's a construction, or it's closed off, or whatever. So, I mean, that's what would be the sole dependence of the functioning of this app, would be that our users would be willing to participate as much and, you know, give us that information that we need to find parking.
I was going to ask that question. Do you really think people are going to be bothered?
That's a good question, but I mean, I also do believe that, well, that's why I kind of want to do like the whole incentive thing, where if you refer friends or whatever, like, you know, you get people, but you're talking about like actually inputting the information.
Right.
So that, I mean, if there's an incentive to it, then I believe so. But I mean, that's also kind of just me kind of hoping to like start a movement and just trying to help other people and you know, trying to, you know, help one another and you know, let and input the most accurate information so that, you know, when they're leaving they get, or like when they leave a parking spot they get points, and when you collect a certain amount of points, then, you know, we can get like, I don't know, we can reward them with a $5 gift card to Starbucks or something, you know, something like that, like some type of incentive that will want to get people involved. Yeah.
Another question, you know, you're going back to Waze. You mentioned earlier about, you know, with the safety features and not being able to use the app
Yes.
while driving. Waze has a setting that you can say that you're the passenger that will allow a person who's in a car, who's not the person driving, to actually use Waze. You know, because like Waze is one that, you know, has something as well. So if you're driving, you know, can use it, but you can say so as the car is moving and you open up Waze, it says, you know, I see the car is moving.
Right.
And
Yes.
then if you say you're the passenger, it will still allow you to use it.
Right.
So that's just I wanted to remind you about that. And also, you know, going back up to the incentives, Gas Buddy is another app that's out there that is for finding cheap gas, and they actually and it is user driven. So they will ask the users to update gas prices.
Okay.
And then they ask future users who have gone to that to sort of verify the prices accurate based on what someone says. So there's incentives. You get points and rewards.
So it's definitely like possible then to incorporate this. It's not like a reach, which is, and I mean, you know, the thing about also with, I mean, especially with today, like, you know, I mean, like I mentioned, like with Uber and Lyft, like, yeah, so we might have these competing, you know, competitors with this app, but I mean, Uber and Lyft are literally the same thing, but I mean, they're different in their own way. And I really feel that if we, have these incentives that will hopefully drive users and, to locate their parking. I mean, hopefully, we're not necessarily subjected to only just these apps. Like, we're totally, with capitalism, we can literally have everything. We can do.
Is there's been times I've gone to a place to go to a restaurant or business, and I'll find parking on the street, and I go in, they say, oh, there's a sign that says there's like parking in the rear, but I wasn't aware of that. So that could be an incentive that a business could let you, they could sort of almost advertise on your
right
that they have their own designated available parking lot that
Yeah.
may be free or lower cost or just ease of parking.
And that's a good point, because I've also been in that situation where I don't even, if I'm going somewhere and if I don't see parking, if it's not visible, you know what I mean, I'm just gonna go somewhere else. And I really do think that parking is it can also drive away business, if you don't have ample amount of room. So in that case, like you said, we can have we can go to businesses and we can have our users submit in information letting us know that hey, you know what, this location doesn't have or isn't really clear on parking, and you can maybe input that into the app and just make them advertise so they don't lose business. We can all kind of work together to combat this problem.
On that point, and my last point, you mentioned Donald Shoup, and he's definitely the premier expert.
He is, yeah, he's the only one.
And so one of his the books that I read is called The High Cost of
That's what I would. Yeah, that's what I wrote my paper on.
And he was looking at sort of how did a Westwood, it was a comparative study of Westwood and their business area and Old Town Pasadena.
Yeah.
And he was looking at how did Old Town Pasadena thrive while the Westwood did not. And his idea was about parking. And what was interesting was it was sort of counterintuitive that Old Town Pasadena had a higher, it cost more to park there, but yet people went there more. And the reason was because of the lower cost in Westwood, and people would drive around more looking for that low price,
right,
which then fed into the congestion. And
exactly.
You're saying, if you can't find parking, you're going to go somewhere else. And so it was actually that the lower cost parking hurt the businesses because the patrons would then drive and look around more
right
for parking. And so it was
exactly
interesting.
No, exactly. I'm saying he's literally pretty much the only person that that really kind of went into detail about that, because it doesn't seem like a problem. The parking, it seems so simple. Okay, I'm just gonna go park here. But it's really more than just. It can hurt businesses. It can hurt. Our city. It can hurt our environment. Looking for the right amount of the cheapest amount or free parking, and then also, he also mentioned about taking away all the crazy signs that have, which also, makes it even more complicated for drivers, because then they're sitting there and they're looking, all right, well, what is it, you know what I mean? Or if anything, the app can incorporate that information for you, you know what I mean, or something like that.
Another thought that's running around in my head, I don't know if you've been noticing in the news recently, there's been a lot of talk about self-driving cars. And that can change a lot of this because the idea with self-driving cars would be you don't own a personal car, you call up a car who drives you somewhere. Now that's not going to happen next year. So
right. It's definitely going to.
You've still got a few years while when your app would be useful then.
Right.
It might be that the parking problem will eventually
be obsolete. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that our biggest, I don't want to say issue, but it's kind of technology is moving so fast, and sometimes it's even moving faster than we can even get a hold of. And and I mean, I was gonna say, like, and that's why I feel like, an app would kind of be good, because it's like, it has to do with technology. I mean, everything's at your fingertips, but I mean, you are right. Like, how is that gonna work if, there are what are you gonna do? Like, how are you gonna, ticket a car that is not from a driver, or is not driving, so, I mean, I get what you're pointing, that's something that I definitely have to,
Wait for the car reservation, but it's really good.
Right, it wouldn't be parking, it would just go off and pick up.
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah. That is true, because then it just can go back to, like, your house, or it can go back to...
I heard on the radio in the last few days, because I was driving and I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention, but someone had a timeline, and he predicted that in X number of years, and as I said, it wasn't 3 or 5 years, but it was still probably within your lifetime. He predicted that self-driving cars would take over, and that private car ownership would come behind, because it just wouldn't be necessary. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your questions. And I mean, I definitely will incorporate that into my paper too, because...
And
Ms. Melissa Jurado. My major is liberal arts with an emphasis in criminal justice and psychology. My capstone presentation is on the differences between male and female prisoner subcultures. Okay, so why? My interest for this topic began all the way back when the elections were going on for the propositions for Prop 62 and 66. These propositions dealt with, inmates and the death penalty, in which it brought to my attention that I attended a walk at Homeboys Industry. Just in case, for those who are not familiar with Homeboys Industry is an organization that supports and trains formerly gang members and previously incarcerated men and women. So their main goal is to help them to redirect their lives, and they do this by providing them with different services, like programs, and programs for parenting classes, and if they suffer with addiction and stuff, so classes for that. And they're mostly known for their tattoo remover services. And then the homies and homegirls are provided full-time employment if they go for an 18-month program. So all of these questions started to, So for majority of the homegirls, they go more for parenting classes than for anger management classes. I wanted to know why this was occurring, and I wanted to know why do males deal more with anger management than females, and I wanted to see how prison affects inmates psychologically, and who has more difficult time adapting in prison life, do males and females. So all of these questions started to rise, but I especially wanted to educate myself and others about the topic, because to be honest, before I did any sort of research on my topic, I knew very little about the prison subcultures and the difficulties inmates go through when adapting to prison life. So basically, I just had the brief knowledge of what I've seen on television and from what I read in my textbooks, but nothing into depth. So after doing research, I realized with the knowledge that I have now, I want to educate others and make them aware about the different towards these. I wanted to see I wanted for people to have respect towards them, and for them to not use this culture, as a form of making jokes, or to use it for fashion, for fashion, or to be viewed as this culture being as cool. So the importance of this research is to help us identify which areas prisoners struggle with as they enter the prison system. It shows and educates society, including correction, what inmates need to work on while they are in prison. It also concludes the benefits and educational programs that are in prison. So research shows us the reasons inmates need education more than ever in order to successfully re-enter society once they are released and use the knowledge and skills they have learned to obtain a job in order to support themselves and their families. So if we aren't aware about the inmate culture, what occurs in prison and what these inmates go through while they're incarcerated, we don't know how to help them with their addictions, their depressions, their mental illnesses. And then also the research shows us the importance of having rehabilitation. Which brings me to a case study I want to talk about real quickly. It's about a study that was conducted in 2004 through 2008 by the Journal of Sociological Research. They discovered the impact of halfway houses. So the study analyzed two groups. The first group was inmates who successfully completed parole, and the second group was inmates who completed the halfway houses program and then on parole. So the findings of this study showed us how individuals who completed in the halfway house program were more likely to be successfully discharged from the parole than the individuals who were released from a correctional facility and then were sent directly to parole. So 60% of the halfway houses parole group successfully completed compared to the 48 that were facilitated in the parole group. So the findings shows us that halfway houses do have a success rate because of the short and long-term effects it has on individuals. Alright, so for my research journey, I started using databases like Academic Search Premier and ProQuest. I use key terms and phrases like inmate subculture, gender differences, inmate code, like elements of prisons and prison challenges. So with the key terms and phrases, it led me to my first findings, which is the meaning of inmate code, which refers to the rules and values that have developed among prisoners inside prison's social system. So I learned that the inmate code is taken very seriously amongst the prisoners. If someone doesn't follow the inmate code amongst fellow other inmates might view you as either being weak or disrespectful or even like categorized as like being a snitch. So there are then two theoretical models on inmate social roles. The first one is the deprivation model and the second one is importation model. So the first one is the belief that inmates adapt to the situation, and the second one is the belief that inmate subcultures are brought into prison from the outside world, which includes like their values, their roles, and then their behaviors. Further research brought me to a survey that was conducted in 2002, and it was conducted on 6,983 inmates. The numbers were that women were nearly 1.5 times more likely to suffer from drug dependency, but significantly less likely to suffer from alcohol dependency. So the survey discovered that women inmates were more likely to suffer from medical, psychiatric, and drug dependency, and then men suffer more from alcohol dependency and aggression. So the survey depicts that mostly women suffer from mental problems such as schizophrenia, severe depression, and delusional disorders. So women prisoners are 6 times more likely than men and about 4.5 times more likely to suffer from a serious mental illness than people in the general population. So the results of the survey shows us that men and women prisoners have developed poor health while being in prison. So both men and women suffer from chronic medical disorders such as cancer and diabetes, and then like psychiatric disorders such as bipolar anxiety and substance dependency. So further research that I'd like to share with you guys real quickly that I found interesting is that imprisonment brings problems of low income, social isolation, difficulties of maintaining contact, and also the social stigma and effects of imprisonment may result in feelings of hopelessness, powerlessness, shame, and guilt. And then, so solutions. So according to the American Psychological Association, in order to improve these services, we like psychologists, correction officers, and prison employees needs to be more educated on why women differ from men. We have to, there needs to be like a balance between the two jail systems,
and have more health services being provided for the prisoners, like having access for vaccination in order to help for like no more like these diseases to spread, and then like having the proper programs to rehabilitate the inmates and help them cope with their rehabilitations. So these are just like a few pictures of some of the current programs that are in prison currently. So they do like yoga, meditation, they have support groups, counseling, and they could get like their high school degree. And if they have good like behavior, they're eligible to work either like in the kitchen, or if there needs like maintenance around the facility, they could help with gardening or do like the laundry. And then obstacles. I didn't really, my obstacles didn't really deal with the research part. My obstacles more dealt with when I had to put my paper together. I'm not a strong writer when it comes to APA format, so I really struggle with that. I also had to be careful on the way that I was presenting my information. And then of course, trying to make my paper flow and, trying not to be too wordy when it came to writing my paragraphs. And then future research, there are still questions that remain unanswered, and still future research needs to occur. Like why is the female prison population increasing? Currently, over the years, the increase of women prisoners has increased, and currently more women are entering the prison system right now. As well as going more into depth on the factors that lead people to end up behind bars. And then also I didn't really get to cover gangs in prisons and how they operate, but having research on the influence of prison gang affiliation can help us better understand the prison culture. This concludes my capstone presentation. Thank you for listening, and do you have any questions?
Could you kind of sum up the differences you found between male and female prisoners?
Yeah, okay. So they all tend to suffer from the same things, when it comes to like medical disorders and like psychiatric, but women were always, in all the like case studies that I saw, women were always tend to be a little bit higher than the males. And then like the reasons like vary. They say that usually women tends to suffer more like with psychological things because due to them like being mothers, and then also like men deal more with other things while they're in prison, like rape and stuff. But other than that, they're kind of just, they suffer through the same things. But and then I started reading like personal information and like with like different like not biographies, but they all tend to say that everyone goes through like the same thing, but it's just the differences on the way that you're able to like cope with them. So yeah, I don't know.
Go on, Ash.
I really haven't.
They have even written this on one of your segments. Some of them, well, do you know whether those medical problems were due to prison conditions or were they pre-existing?
Some of them were pre-existent, and then some of them developed while being in prison. That's why I wanted to educate everyone that it's a big difference how the system is right now, that sometimes even they tend to take them to isolation, and that just worsens worsens them. It doesn't benefit them. So we have to try to find ways in order to make them not cope and stuff, have them to be busy, and then make them aware that how the reasons why they're able to not cope, but they're able to be the services that are being provided in prison, then it'll help them when they come in the outside world, because majority of them are with low income and stuff, so they don't really have the help that they need in the community. So when they come to prison, I feel that corrections, their job is to help facilitate and correct. So I feel they have to have like different services in order to help them, and they get like the full experience, while they're in prison, so they don't have to come back and like for the system to like repeat again. So.
Right. And were these studies of prisoners of all types, or for example, would any of this apply to people on death row or people in for very serious crimes?
No, they were just it was like very vague information. There wasn't really like current up-to-date information. It was just studies that they've done in the past, but it didn't really go into depth if they were, what type of inmates they were. So, yeah. That's it.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Today, I am going to be talking to you about wrongful convictions and exonerations in the U.S. In 1977, in a suburb in Chicago, 16-year-old Kathleen Kroll faked a rape because she was scared to get pregnant by her boyfriend. In the course of the investigation that followed, she picked Gary Dobson's photo out of a photo lineup and said that he was the rapist. Dobson was sentenced 25 to 50 years in prison. In 1985, Kroll recanted her statement and told prosecutors that she had lied. Despite the recantation, it took until 1989 to clear Dobson. Since Mr. Dobson, there have been 2,018 victims of wrongful conviction identified in the United States. However, this number is likely an underestimate considering there was no database or national registry of exonerations until 2012. We study exonerations because they are the only evidence we have that wrongful convictions occur. So in order to fix the problem of wrongfully convicting innocent people in our criminal justice system, we must study and understand exonerations. Other victims of wrongful convictions include Mr. Ronald Cotton. In 1985, Ronald Cotton, a black man, was convicted of raping Jennifer Thompson, a white woman, in Burlington, North Carolina. Thompson was the only eyewitness at trial and was considered a very effective witness by law enforcement because she had spent a considerable amount of time with her rapist, and she was very determined to observe him closely so that she would be able to identify him later on. She was equally as confident with her statements about Ronald Cotton when he was retried in 1987 and convicted again and sentenced a second time to life in prison. Even so, she was wrong. Cotton was exonerated 8 years later in 1995 after DNA tests proved that he was innocent and the real rapist was a different black man who was in prison on other charges. Mr. Rondell Dale Adams. In December 1976, a man named David Harris was arrested in Vidor, Texas, in connection with the murder of a Dallas patrolman, Robert Wood. He promptly blamed the killing on Randall Dale Adams, a passing acquaintance who Harris had spent most of the day with leading up to the murder. Harris said that he stole the car from which the patrolman was shot, was present at the murder, drove Adams away from the scene, and kept the stolen car afterwards. Based on his own statements, Harris could have been convicted of auto theft and accessory to murder. Instead, he testified against Adams at trial and had his charges dropped in return for the testimony. Adams was exonerated in 1989. By then, Harris had been sentenced to death for another murder that occurred in 1985. In 2004, the other man, Harris, was executed. Mr. Jeff Descovich. In November 1989, a high school classmate of 16-year-old Jeff was raped, beaten, and strangled in Westchester County, New York. Descovich became a suspect because he seemed overly distraught by the victim's death and visited her wake 3 times. Police spoke with Descovich several times in January 1990 when he agreed to a polygraph exam. Over a period of 6 hours, Deskovich was held in isolation, given 3 polygraph exams, and by an examiner who was told by law enforcement to get the confession. He was grilled by officers who told him that he was guilty and that he failed the lie detector test, and that he could only go home if he just told them that he did it. Eventually, Deskovich gave up and admitted sobbing that he killed the girl. Years later, he explained that he felt his life was in danger. He said, "I didn't think they were going to stop until I told them what they wanted to hear." By the end of the interrogation, he was under the table, curled up, crying in the fetal position. He was convicted of rape and murder in January 1991 and exonerated in November 2006 after 16 years in prison, when DNA tests showed that the semen recovered from the victim came from a convicted murderer who was already in prison for another murder. Mr. Earl Washington. In June 1982, a woman named Rebecca Lynn Williams was raped and murdered in Culpeper, Virginia. In 1983, Earl Washington, a 22-year-old black man with only an IQ of 69, was arrested nearby for an alleged burglary and malicious wounding. Over 2 days of questioning, Washington confessed to 5 separate crimes. 4 of the confessions were not pursued because Washington's descriptions did not match the actual facts of the crimes, and because the victims did not identify Washington as the criminal. In the 5th confession, however, Washington said that he killed Rebecca Lynn Williams, who was dead and could no longer set the record straight. Washington's initial confession, before police cleaned it up, was riddled with errors. He did not know the race of his supposed victim. He did not know the address where she was killed, or that he had supposedly raped her. Nonetheless, Washington was convicted and sentenced to death in January 1984. He was exonerated by DNA evidence 16 years later in 2000. In April 2004, 4 hours after aggressive interrogation without his parents or a lawyer, 12-year-old Jonathan Adams admitted that he killed 9-year-old Amy Yates in Carlton, Georgia. About a year later, he pled guilty in juvenile court and was sentenced to 12 months in a residential psychiatric treatment facility. 6 months later, a mentally challenged 18-year-old confessed to killing the girl, saying he wanted to make the truth known as part of a spiritual transformation. 2 months later, Adams was released. Mr. Philip Cannon. In 2000, Philip Cannon was convicted of a triple murder in Polk County, Oregon, and sentenced to life in prison. The main evidence connecting Philip to the crime was testimony by an FBI agent that the bullets used to kill the victims were metallurgically identical to the bullets found in Cannon's home. In 2004, a report by the National Academy of Sciences found that FBI testimony based on metallurgical analysis linking a particular bullet to ones found in a suspect's cartridge box, was overstated, unreliable, and misleading. In 2005, the FBI discontinued this type of analysis. In 2009, Cannon was granted a new trial because of the unreliability of forensic evidence used to convict him. In December of that year, his charges were dismissed. In 1986, Curtis Edward McCarty was sentenced to death in Oklahoma City for a 1983 rape murder. Forensic analysis Joyce Gilchrist provided critical evidence at trial, testifying that the semen recovered from the victim's body had the same blood type as McCarty. In fact, the semen came from a, quote, non-secretor, unquote, which means that it could not reveal the blood type of the donor. Gilchrist also testified that hairs found at the scene came from McCarty, even though she had concluded in 1983 that the hairs from the crime scene were not similar to McCarty's. After McCarty was arrested in 1985, she changed her notes and reversed her findings to say that he was at the crime scene, or could have been at the crime scene. trial, she testified that McCarty was in fact at the crime scene. Attorneys for McCarty discovered the switch in 2000 when Gilchrist was under investigation for fraud in other criminal cases. McCarty was exonerated by DNA in 2007 after 21 years in prison. Albert Johnson. In 1992, a white woman was raped by a black stranger in Contra Costa County, California. She was shown a lineup that included a picture of Mr. Albert Johnson. She expressed doubt whether Johnson was the rapist and said his complexion was too light. An officer assured her that the rapist was in the lineup and told her that Johnson's appearance in the photograph might be different from his present appearance because it had been taken after he spent years in prison with little exposure to the sun. And lastly, we have Patricia Resser. In 1999, 4 children of Patricia Resser, a girl and 3 boys, ages 9 to 13, testified in Yamahill County, Oregon, that from 1988 until 1994, they were physically abused and forced to have sex with each other and with Resser and her boyfriend. Resser admitted in court that she had been, quote, a drug dealer, a whore, a thief, a junkie, and a bad mommy, end quote, but denied any physical or sexual abuse to her children. She testified that she believed the children had been persuaded to make accusations by therapists and their foster mother. Resser was convicted on numerous accounts of rape and sex abuse and sentenced to 116 years in prison. In 2002, the 2 older boys told their foster mother that they had lied about the sexual abuse. Oregon State Police reinvestigated the case and all 4 children recanted their statements and passed a polygraph exam. Resser was exonerated in June 2002. Each of these victims of wrongful conviction had specific factors involved in their cases that led to their wrongful conviction. It has been established that all wrongful convictions we know about involve one or more of these causal factors, whether it be mistaken eyewitness testimony, perjury or false accusation, false confession, false or misleading forensic evidence, or official misconduct. The frequency in which each factor is present in cases that have been cataloged in the registry, are shown here. And the frequency in which they are present by type of crime are shown here. And so the big question is, how do we fix the system? An overreaching answer to this question, but multiple answers to the question with each causal factor needing to be addressed independently. So in regards to eyewitness testimony, I propose that any case with evidence other than eyewitness testimony should be presented with only that, leaving out any circumstantial eyewitness testimony. Second, in cases where this is not possible, there should be a requirement to inform judges and jurors of the known unreliability of eyewitness evidence and any evidence that comes from eyewitness identifications. When a witness is put on a stand, information should be required to the court about the circumstances that surrounded the eyewitness during the time of their memory collection. For example, the witness's level of stress or distraction, distance from the event, lighting at the time of the event, intoxication level, their focus during the crime, and if there were any racial challenges for them identifying another person. In cases where eyewitness testimony is the only evidence and inevitable to present in court, all eyewitness testimony should be accompanied with a polygraph test to ensure, 1, they are not consciously lying, and 2, they have not been persuaded or been a victim of suggestiveness by law enforcement or other people. In regards to official misconduct, I propose passage of legislation to make the following police activities completely illegal on a national level for the collection of evidence. 1, committing or procuring perjury, torture, threats, or other highly coercive interrogations, threatening or lying to eyewitnesses, forensic fraud, framing innocent suspects for crimes that never occurred, suggestiveness, and concealing exculpatory evidence, In most jurisdictions, variations of this law already exist, so making any additional points should be an easy change. I would also propose imposing fines on a personal level to officers who are caught doing any of these activities. An additional piece of legislation to make any evidence collected by these means completely inadmissible in court. I would then propose officers receive annual training to either, one, teach them the difference between official misconduct and what is not, or two, a refresher on what is allowed and what is not. For official misconduct, the last point I would propose is to enlist a third-party review board in each prosecutorial office across the nation who would check how evidence was collected before the case even goes in front of a judge. Because false confessions are most commonly collected through official misconduct, I propose that a good portion of this issue could be solved with the plan I laid out for official misconduct. The second most common way false confessions are procured is through plea bargaining with the prosecution. So I would propose that we eliminate plea bargaining without direct evidence unless the bargain includes no further incarceration time. This will keep innocent defendants from taking plea bargains for shorter sentences when they are in fear of long sentences and pretrial incarceration. Perjury and false accusations can be absolved with the plans I laid out for mistaken eyewitness testimony and for official misconduct. Lastly, false and misleading forensic evidence comes in three categories: general mistakes, invalid testing techniques, and official misconduct or fraud. Issues of official misconduct and falsifying forensic evidence can be ceased by the plan laid out for official misconduct I mentioned before. Invalid testing techniques can be addressed by mandating forensic tests be tested for accuracy and approved at a governmental level before being admissible as evidence in a court of law. Additionally, all forensic evidence must have confirmatory testing either by an additional laboratory or a second round of testing by the same laboratory. This will ensure to eliminate any general mistakes. Are there any questions?
This is not really a question, and I've been meaning to email you about this. I read an article in the New Yorker recently in which this person argued that the position of district attorney should not be an elected position because to get elected you have to convince everyone you're tough on crime, and that creates this great
Yes.
Motivation
Yes.
to push evidence and so
I completely agree with that, and in my paper I talked a little bit about the high stakes of how high the stakes are for the prosecution, especially when it comes to crimes like murder and rape, because they are so emotionally wrenching cases that in a lot of cases there's so much pressure on them just to find somebody who committed the crime that they'll take any means and do whatever they have to put somebody in jail, whether it's right or wrong.
Right.
Do you think cameras, particularly in the interrogation rooms, would help with a lot of this? And does it help with all that? It seems like we're at the stage now where cameras should be present in all of these types of situations, right?
I think as it stands right now, there are cameras required in interrogation rooms as far as I know, but the problem comes with who reviews that footage. If it's somebody within the own department, in my paper I talked a little bit about how all jurisdictions across the U.S., so that's like 3,000 counties with criminal prosecution offices, they all kind of operate a little differently, and within the own law enforcement office, they kind of, there's a lot of flexibility for them to kind of just do what they want based on whoever their captain is. So if you have somebody in the office who's the guy's friend who's doing the interrogation, having the camera in there really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Are you in favor of national standards then, even though law enforcement is more of a local responsibility?
I would kind of hope we could get to the point where the national standard is applied in every office. I am in favor of national standards. Knowing that they're not applied in every office the same way, my hope would be to get to the point where there's a little bit better oversight and all the law, all the sort of rules and whatnot are applied perfectly in every office. I mean, we're not going to get there, but goal is to get close to that.
It's a real challenge, right?
It is. Any other questions?
Well, another comment I found it very interesting in your paper, and it's kind of in a way amusing, that there is actual evidence that people find it more difficult to identify a person of race.
Yes.
That's so intriguing.
Yeah.
Or, that white people confuse black people.
Yes.
Presumably vice versa.
Yes, the evidence is that it is harder to identify a stranger of another race than it is to identify a stranger of your own race.
Right.
Completely interesting, but it does lend to two stories that I had mentioned where a white woman was raped by a black man and could not, in fact, identify the black stranger, whether it was the right person or not.
And I have an interesting or intriguing question. What do you plan to do from here on? Are you interested in going into law?
I'm leaving for law school in August. My goal is to go into post-conviction law and work with an innocence project in New York.
Congratulations. Where are you going?
Cardozo Law School in New York City.
Congratulations.
Thank
Are
you.
From New York, or is this a new venture for you?
It's going to be new. I'm from here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What made you choose New York?
Well, they have the Innocence Project program that I wanted to get into, and I also figured, I'm kind of young, so I might as well go have an adventure before I get too settled in whatever career, wherever I'm at.
Love it. Good luck.
Thank you.
Very impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. One last little bit here. This project was in the name of the 2018 known victims of wrongful convictions who have collectively lost 17,610 years of their lives in our correction system.
Good afternoon. My name is Andres Jimenez, and today I will be presenting Psychology Use of Force Encounters. Before we get into further discussion, I would like to introduce some definitions that play a big factor in the use of force encounters. So the first two are reasonable force and excessive force. Amount of force necessary use to protect oneself or one's property is used only if believed that such force is necessary to prevent the commission of a forcible felony, which is a legal force. An example of a reasonable force is if an officer body slams a suspect that is attacking his fellow officer, which is to control the situation from not letting the suspect harm the officer, which is a reasonable force. However, excessive force, when an officer uses beyond maximum amount of force on a person, is a violation of a person's constitutional rights, which is a legal force. An example of this excessive force is when an officer repeatedly kicks a suspect that is already apprehended. As you can see here, I have some photos. On the left-hand side, you can see an officer trying to get a suspect's handgun that he may use to harm someone, which is using reasonable force to disarm the suspect. On the right, you have excessive force where there are 3 officers continuously kicking a suspect that is already on the ground. And then here on the left is just an officer, just leading him to his patrol with no excessive force, just walking him to his patrol vehicle. as for armed suspects and unarmed suspects. If they appear to be in possession of an object such as a gun, knife, or any object that may be used as a deadly weapon. If a person is behaving in a manner a reasonable person could get confused by brandishing deadly weapons. Unarmed suspects, if they appear to not be in possession of an object such as a gun, knife, or any object that may be used as a deadly weapon. Even unarmed suspects can be killed by officers. Police take the risk and use their own judgment, depending on, which I will show you here, depending on the suspect's suspicion. He may have a gun, he may pretend like he has a gun, maybe waving a gun under the jacket. You never know. That's why an officer uses his own judgment on how to deal with the situation. As you can see here, this is armed suspect, which he has a deadly weapon pointing it. Over here is unarmed suspect, which is he is waving his hands in the air, indicating that he has no weapon. So there are 3 deadly force situations. Deadly force is used by a person causing substantial death or serious bodily harm or injury. When someone decides to use deadly force, they must be conscious of what the life-threatening outcome may be. The first situation is deadly force may be used to disable an armed suspect. For an example, an officer may use a taser gun to disarm a suspect, to temporarily disarm a suspect by paralyzing him to disable the weapon. Situation number 2. Deadly force may be used to wound a suspect from harming himself or others. An example of this is an officer shooting a suspect in the arm that has a weapon to prevent him from harming himself or others. Thirdly, the situation for killing someone is deadly force may be used to kill a suspect if the officer fears for his own life. An example is when a suspect continuously shoots an officer, the only way to disarm the shooter is to use deadly force, which is in this instance kill the person. There are 3 theories of police behavior. The first is sociological, psychological, and thirdly, organizational. Here, sociological is based on the premise that police behavior is influenced by the social dynamics of police-citizen encounters, which the officer characteristics suggest that age in an officer has indicated that younger officers are more likely to use force. The length of a service in law enforcement indicates that fewer years of experience in law enforcement are more likely to use force because they're inexperienced in certain situations, so they don't know how to react in certain encounters. And thirdly, the level of education in an officer found that officers that have more education are less likely to use force. For the suspect characteristics, age in a suspect, they found that younger suspects is more likely to receive some form of police force than older suspects. Race has always played a part in use of force. Many people believe that race is like one of the main reasons why police use force. they feel like that's an influence in the encounters when police use force. However, there have been mixed findings. Some have found non-significant relationship between race and force. However, others have found race does increase the likelihood of force. And finally, the levels of drugs or alcohol in a suspect. If a suspect is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they are more likely to be incoherent. So in order for the officer to control the situation, the officer has to apply force to control the situation of the incoherent suspect. Encounter characteristics. Presence of bystanders have found mixed results. Some have found that some have found out that bystanders indicate more influence of force being used in the encounter and less likely to be used in force. And then the presence of officers have also found mixed results. Some have found more likely to use force and less likely to use force. There's been mixed findings. So the psychological theory is determined primarily by characteristics, values, and attitudes of the individual prior to a job. So the personality in a suspect, a combination of characteristics or qualities that form an individual's distinctive character. Personality is a major motivational part that drives behavior within individuals. Normality is generally defined by social norms, and that crimes would then result from any type of abnormal, dysfunctional, or disturbed mental process within the personality of the individual. Examples can be diseased mind, improper conditioning, emulation of unfit role models, and adjustments to inner conflicts. Therefore, criminal behavior becomes purposeful to the individual because they have certain felt needs to be addressed. Now, you guys are wondering how it influences an officer's psychological response. Officers will consider a display of disrespect from a suspect as their authority is not being taken seriously. Therefore, they are more likely to use force in order to gain compliance from the suspect. An officer's job is to protect and serve, and they will demonstrate their authority to the suspect who is involved in criminal activity. But when an officer who does not do his job and is disrespectful, it negatively impacts the attitude towards all police for that citizen and the citizens that witnessed the encounter. In my previous slide, I gave examples of disturbed mental process. I'd like to elaborate more on the adjustments to inner conflicts that can affect the demeanor of a suspect towards an officer straight off the bat. For an example, if an officer is compared to agencies that allow officers to fill out their own forms. The agencies that collect use of force data for a specific purpose report significantly higher rates of force. Police respond differently due to demands on police work and organizational constraints. One finding from Wilson case is the study of police organizational styles and the officer's behavior suggested that individual police behavior and ideas about the police role are a function of department goals. As for the quick judgment, in a pressured and highly dangerous encounter with a suspect, officers had nearly a split second to react appropriately, cautiously, and out of harm's way as much as they can obtain. Whether the outcome is reasonable or excessive, officers have to be prepared. In conclusion, I have presented 3 theories that demonstrate the types of police behavior and suspect behavior that is influenced by sociological, psychological, and organizational. Because of these influenced behaviors, I have also shown the actions of forces which are reasonable, excessive, and deadly that are used in encounters that officers come across in everyday life. And lastly, a police officer's duty is to serve and protect the well-being of a community and to use their best judgment in making decisions that result in best possible outcomes. Now, for the reason why I chose this topic is because this in general, the officers and use of force and the killings that's been going on with citizens killing officers and officers killing citizens. I wanted to get a more in-depth of what influences the use of force. Any questions?
I had one question. You mentioned back there, back a few slides, that departments that collective use of force reports for a specific purpose had higher rates of violent encounters, I think. The middle one there.
This one?
Right.
Agencies that
So, what do you mean by collected for a specific purpose? What would be an example of that?
for the agencies that collect use of force specific. So there's different agencies and they have different roles in the community. So some might want to know the use of force in just African Americans, and they want to do a study on that, or just different, depending on the department.
Okay, I found that one a little puzzling. I'm not sure why that would have anything to do with higher rates of force.
Because they found that, because what I found in organizational theory, it's kind of hard to go with these theories because each agency has their own role.
Right.
They have has their own role in the community, and some want to use use of force data or forms, so they know like what the officers are doing, and so that plays a factor in the officers' behavior because they know they will have to write a report.
So I had another question.
Yeah.
What was the most surprising thing you found in this?
The surprising thing?
Yeah.
I would say the deadly force, just the definition itself. Because a lot of people think when a civilian is killed, many people think right off the bat it's excessive force. But they don't know the true meaning of it or the true encounter of what happened. So they just immediately are like, oh, well, why did he kill him? Why did he use, So that's why. That's one thing that I found because I.
I have a question. When you are looking at some of these sources, no information about body cams and handheld cams and cameras on the cell phone. I think that is going to be interesting to see how the fact that officers and general citizens, most of them have cameras on them now.
Yes.
And so is that going to increase or decrease the use of force? And you know, that technology has been still so new. I don't know if any research has been done on it yet, because a lot of these things are just coming to light in the news because people have had cameras on the scene.
Yes.
Whereas even 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. So what do you think? How's the fact that more cameras, both on the police side, in the cars, on the citizens, on the cell phones, how do you think that's going to affect use of force?
There was one research that I did find that officers that do use body cameras, they tend, when a suspect or a citizen sees that body camera, their whole demeanor changes during the encounter, because they're being watched, they're being recorded.
Yeah.
So they don't want to act out or be wrong in this situation.
So it might actually diffuse situations.
Yes.
That's interesting.
All right, well, thank you, Andrea.